You weren't disrespected all at once. You were slowly trained into it. One unanswered feeling, one swallowed reaction, one moment where you knew something was wrong, but told yourself it wasn't worth addressing. And now here you are, tired, confused, overextended, wondering how people keep taking from you without giving anything back. This isn't because you're weak. It's because you were taught that being easy to deal with was safer than being respected. But here's the truth most people never hear. The version of you that avoids conflict to keep connection is the same version that gets ignored, drained, and eventually replaced. And what happens next, if you don't change this, decides whether you become respected or slowly erased. Most people think peace is something you earn after everything else is handled, after the work is done, after everyone is satisfied, after the noise dies down. But peace doesn't work like that. Peace is a resource, and every time you delay protecting it, someone else spends it for you. Not in dramatic ways. In small, almost invisible withdrawals. A message you didn't want to answer. A conversation you didn't have the energy for. A situation you stayed in longer than you should have because leaving felt uncomfortable. None of these moments feel dangerous on their own, but together they quietly drain you. This is how people lose themselves without realizing it. Not through chaos, but through accommodation. You don't wake up one day burned out and resentful. You arrive there slowly by teaching your nervous system that being constantly available is normal. That tension is the price of connection. That rest must be justified. And once your body adapts to that rhythm, peace starts to feel unfamiliar, even suspicious. Silence feels empty. Calm feels boring. And you start seeking stimulation not because you want it, but because chaos has become familiar. Here's what nobody talks about. Most people don't lose their peace to toxic relationships. They lose it trying to keep things smooth. They become the emotional buffer, the one who absorbs stress so others don't have to feel it. And the more you do that, the more your inner world gets crowded with noise that isn't even yours. You feel it in your chest, in your sleep, in that low-level irritability you can't explain. That's not personality. That's unprotected peace. And the dangerous part is that your body always knows before your mind catches up. You can feel when someone drains you. You notice how your energy drops before you even speak. How your focus scatters after certain conversations. How relief shows up the moment you're alone again. But instead of listening to that information, you override it. You tell yourself you're being dramatic. You minimize your own signals. And every time you do that, you teach yourself not to trust your instincts. Peace doesn't disappear all at once. It erodes through permission, through the belief that your time is flexible, your energy is negotiable, and your boundaries can wait. But the moment you start treating peace as non-negotiable, something shifts. Not externally, internally. You stop reacting so fast. You pause before responding. You choose solitude over obligation. And that's when your power starts to come back. Quietly, steadily. Because once you protect your peace, you stop living at the mercy of other people's needs and start living from your own clarity. Disrespect rarely shows up as open hostility. If it did, most people would shut it down immediately. Instead, it sneaks in through subtle moments that are easy to excuse. A dismissive comment. A joke that lands a little too sharp. Being talked over. Being ignored just long enough to make you question whether you're imagining it. And because it's not obvious, you stay quiet. You tell yourself it's not that deep. You don't want to seem sensitive. You don't want to create tension. So you let it slide. But silence is never neutral. Silence is information. And when you stay quiet in moments that require self-respect, the message received isn't patience or maturity. It's permission. People don't need to be cruel to take advantage of you. They only need to realize there's no cost. And once someone senses that pushing your boundaries comes without consequence, they don't suddenly stop. They adjust. They push a little further next time. Then a little more. And what started as a small moment becomes a pattern. This is how power dynamics are formed. Not through aggression, but through repetition. Each time you swallow your reaction, you reinforce the role you're playing. The agreeable one. The understanding one. The one who won't leave. And over time, that role becomes your identity in the relationship. Not because you chose it consciously, but because you never disrupted it. Disrespect grows where resistance never shows up. Here's the part that's uncomfortable to admit. Most people who walk all over others aren't villains. They're responders. They respond to what's allowed. When you stay after being dismissed, mocked, or minimized, you teach them that access to you doesn't require respect. And once that lesson is learned, it's rarely unlearned without a consequence attached. Deep down, you already know this. You feel the internal shift every time you walk away from a moment that hurt and pretend it didn't. There's a quiet loss of dignity that lingers. A tension between wanting to be chosen and resenting yourself for staying. That inner conflict doesn't fade with time. It compounds. And the longer it goes on, the harder it becomes to speak up without feeling explosive. Disrespect doesn't stop because someone suddenly understands you. It stops when the dynamic changes. When silence is replaced with clarity. When boundaries are backed by action. And that doesn't always mean confrontation. Sometimes it means distance. Sometimes it means leaving without explanation. Because the truth is, people only stop crossing lines when they realize the line is real. And the moment you stop offering endless tolerance is the moment your presence starts being treated with care. Guilt is the reason most boundaries collapse before they ever form. Not because you don't know what you want, but because you were taught that choosing yourself comes with a moral cost. That saying no makes you selfish. That prioritizing your needs means you're letting someone else down. So even when your body tightens, even when your mind says this doesn't feel right, you override it. You agree anyway, and you call that being kind. But guilt isn't proof that you're doing something wrong. It's proof that you're breaking a pattern. Most people who struggle with boundaries learned early that approval was earned through compliance. Be easy. Be helpful. Don't cause problems. And that conditioning doesn't disappear just because you're an adult now. It shows up every time you hesitate before saying no. Every time you over-explain a simple decision. Every time you apologize for having limits. Here's what makes the guilt trap so dangerous. Every guilt-driven yes teaches your nervous system that your needs are optional. That discomfort is something you should push through for the sake of harmony. And over time, that creates a split inside you. One part knows what you want. The other part keeps sacrificing it to avoid rejection. That inner conflict is exhausting. It's why you feel drained even when nothing dramatic is happening. You're constantly negotiating against yourself. The truth is, people who benefit from your lack of boundaries will always make your no feel heavy. Not because your no is unreasonable, but because it disrupts their access. They don't miss you. They miss your availability, your emotional labor, your willingness to bend. And once you see that clearly, guilt starts to lose its power. Because you realize it was never about fairness. It was about control. Saying no without guilt doesn't mean becoming cold or careless. It means being honest. It means allowing the discomfort of disappointment without rushing to fix it. You stop padding your boundaries with excuses. You stop performing politeness to soften your truth. You let no stand on its own. And yes, it feels uncomfortable at first. But that discomfort is temporary. The resentment you've been carrying from constant self-betrayal is not. The moment you choose clarity over guilt, something stabilizes inside you. Your decisions become cleaner. Your energy returns. You stop feeling pulled in 100 directions. And slowly, you become someone who doesn't just say no, but embodies it. Your tone changes. Your presence shifts. People adjust, not because you demanded respect, but because you stopped negotiating your worth. Mixed signals only feel confusing when you're afraid to accept what they mean. Because when someone truly wants you in their life, clarity isn't a struggle. Effort isn't inconsistent. Presence doesn't disappear and reappear just enough to keep you guessing. And yet, so many people stay stuck in situations where words promise depth, but actions deliver uncertainty. Not because they don't see it, but because walking away feels harder than hoping. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Mixed signals are rarely accidental. They're a way to keep access without responsibility. Just enough attention to hold your interest. Just enough distance to avoid commitment. And the longer you stay, the more the dynamic shifts. You stop asking for clarity. You start adjusting yourself. You lower expectations. You accept less, not because you want to, but because you're trying to keep the connection alive. This is where the real damage happens. Your nervous system gets trained to associate unpredictability with connection. The silence creates anxiety. The return creates relief. And that relief feels like intimacy, even though it's just the end of distress. Over time, you become attached not to the person, but to the emotional swing, the highs and lows, the anticipation. That's not love. That's intermittent reinforcement. And it's one of the strongest psychological hooks there is. People in these dynamics often blame themselves. They assume they're asking for too much, that if they were more patient, more understanding, more flexible, things would settle. But consistency doesn't require convincing. If someone wanted to show up clearly, they would. Confusion is not a phase. It's information. And the longer you ignore it, the more you betray your own standards. The power move in these situations isn't getting answers. It's removing access. Not to provoke a reaction, but to restore your clarity. You stop explaining. You stop waiting. You stop hoping that potential will turn into effort. Because anyone who truly values you won't make you guess where you stand. And anyone who benefits from keeping you uncertain is not confused. They're comfortable. Walking away from mixed signals feels brutal at first. The silence hits harder. The absence feels louder. But what you gain is stability. Your mind stops racing. Your body relaxes. You're no longer living in anticipation of someone else's mood. And that's when you realize something important. Being alone with your peace is far better than being attached to uncertainty. Clarity is not cold. It's self-respect. Chasing validation feels harmless at first. It looks like effort, like care, like wanting to be appreciated. But over time, it quietly rewires how you see yourself. Every time you seek approval from someone who withholds it, you hand them authority over your worth. And the more you chase, the more disconnected you become from the part of you that already knew who you were before you needed permission. Most people don't realize they're addicted to validation. They just know how it feels when attention fades. The anxiety, the urge to explain yourself, the instinct to perform, to be more agreeable, more impressive, more available. You adjust your tone. You filter your thoughts. You soften your boundaries. Not because it's who you are, but because you're trying to secure a sense of safety. And slowly, without noticing, you stop living as yourself and start playing a role. This is how identity collapses. Not through one big betrayal, but through constant self-editing. You become the version of yourself that gets the most approval, even if it costs you your honesty. And the problem with living that way is that even when you get the validation you're chasing, it never satisfies you. Because deep down, you know it wasn't earned by truth. It was earned by adaptation. And that creates a hollow kind of acceptance that fades the moment attention shifts. Validation addiction thrives on fear. Fear of being alone. Fear of being rejected. Fear that without someone choosing you, you disappear. So you keep chasing. You keep proving. You keep hoping that if you do enough, give enough, shrink enough, someone will finally stay. But all that teaches others is that your presence is negotiable. that your value can be delayed, rationed, or withdrawn. The way out isn't becoming colder or more detached. It's becoming anchored. You stop needing reactions to confirm your worth. You stop over-explaining your decisions. You let people misunderstand you if it means staying aligned with yourself. And as uncomfortable as that feels at first, it brings something validation never could. Stability. You start trusting your own standards again. You move differently. You speak with less urgency. You're no longer chasing being chosen because you've already chosen yourself. And when that shift happens, everything changes. The people who only valued your performance fall away. The ones who respect your presence lean in. Not because you demanded anything, but because your energy no longer asks for approval. Validation stops being the goal. It becomes a byproduct of living honestly. And in that honesty, your identity comes back online, steady, intact, and no longer up for negotiation. There comes a moment when the internal shift finally locks in. Not because something dramatic happened, but because something quietly stopped. You stop explaining yourself. You stop reacting immediately. You stop feeling responsible for how other people process your boundaries. And from the outside, it looks like you changed. But the truth is, you didn't become someone new. You returned to who you were before you learned to abandon yourself. This is the moment that confuses people around you. They notice you're calmer, less available, harder to pull into emotional chaos. You don't argue as much. You don't chase clarity. You don't overextend to keep connections alive. And because they were used to the old version of you, the accommodating one, the flexible one, the always there one, this new stability feels unfamiliar, even threatening. They might say you're distant, cold, different. But what they're really reacting to is the loss of access. Internally, this shift feels like relief. Your mind isn't constantly racing ahead to anticipate reactions. Your body isn't bracing for conflict or rejection. You start making decisions based on alignment instead of fear. And that changes everything. Your yes becomes deliberate. Your no becomes final. Your presence carries weight because it's no longer guaranteed. This is where self-respect stops being an idea and becomes a way of moving through the world. You don't announce your boundaries. You embody them. In your tone, in your pace, in how quickly you disengage from anything that costs you clarity. And the most powerful part is that you're no longer trying to be understood by people who were never listening in the first place. Becoming unrecognizable isn't about hardening. It's about refining. You become selective with your time, intentional with your energy, and grounded in your standards. You realize that peace isn't passive. It's maintained. And once you experience life without constant emotional noise, there's no going back. The old patterns lose their grip. The old fears lose their authority. Because you've crossed an internal line, and everything on the other side of it is quieter, clearer, and finally yours. This is the part most people aren't prepared for. After the boundaries are set, after the clarity clicks, after you finally stop chasing and over-explaining, the noise dies down, and what's left is quiet. An empty calendar, fewer messages, long stretches of time where no one is pulling at your attention. And even though this is the consequence of choosing yourself, it can feel unsettling. Because for a long time, chaos was company. Loneliness shows up not because you made the wrong choice, but because you removed distractions. You took away the emotional filler that once kept you busy avoiding yourself. And now there's space. Space to feel the grief of what you outgrew. Space to notice how much of your identity was wrapped around being needed, chosen, or available. That loss can sting. You might second-guess your decisions. Wonder if you were too harsh, too rigid, too much. This is where most people panic and undo everything. But this phase isn't punishment. It's detox. Your nervous system is recalibrating after years of overstimulation. The silence feels heavy because your body was used to constant engagement, to emotional highs and lows, to being pulled in different directions. Without that, your mind doesn't know where to rest yet. So it looks for something familiar, even if familiar was unhealthy. What's important to understand is that loneliness during growth is not the same as abandonment. It's the space between who you were and who you're becoming. And if you don't rush to fill it, something powerful starts to happen. Your thoughts slow down. Your intuition gets louder. You begin to feel yourself again, not as a role, but as a person. This is where real rebuilding begins. Not with new relationships, but with a new relationship to yourself. You learn how to sit with your own presence without needing to prove anything. You stop measuring your worth by how many people want access to you. And slowly, the loneliness transforms. It becomes solitude. Not empty, but intentional. Not isolating, but grounding. If you can stay here without retreating back into old patterns, you come out different. Stronger. Clearer. Less reactive. Because the people and connections that enter your life after this phase aren't filling a void. They're meeting you at a level you didn't have access to before. And that's why this phase matters. It's the price of no longer betraying yourself, and the doorway to a life that actually fits. After the silence, the clarity, and the loneliness, the next step is harder than most realize. Rebuilding your standards without letting bitterness take root. Because when you've been drained, disrespected, or manipulated, it's tempting to armor yourself completely. To erect walls so high that no one can reach you, no one can disappoint you, and no one can ever hurt you again. And while that feels safe, it's not freedom, it's a prison. True growth comes from recalibrating, not punishing. You don't raise your standards to reject people. You raise them to honor yourself. You choose who gets your time and energy based on alignment, not revenge. The lesson isn't to avoid connection. It's to become deliberate with it. To make sure that every yes has a purpose, every presence adds value, and every bond respects the balance between giving and receiving. This phase is where self-respect meets discernment. You begin asking hard questions. Who deserves my focus? Who adds to my life, not just takes from it? Who challenges me to grow without tearing me down? And with every answer, you refine what's non-negotiable and what's flexible. You stop settling for crumbs, for half-effort, for chaos disguised as passion. But here's the key. You don't build this armor with anger. You build it with clarity, with intention, with the knowledge that rejecting what isn't right is not bitterness, it's wisdom. Bitterness creeps in when you confuse rejection with failure, when you take someone else's inability to meet your standards personally. But rebuilding from clarity isn't about holding grudges. It's about refusing to repeat the patterns that once cost you peace. It's about walking forward lighter, not heavier. Each boundary becomes a promise to yourself. Each decision a step toward a life where respect, effort, and alignment are the baseline, not the exception. And when you reach this stage, something remarkable happens. You start attracting the right people naturally. Not because you're defensive, not because you're guarding yourself from hurt, but because your presence now signals that you are whole, complete, and intentional. You're no longer the person who bends to fit. You're the person who chooses wisely. And that shift, subtle as it may seem at first, transforms everything, from relationships to work, from your inner dialogue to how the world responds to your energy. Everything you've done, the boundaries, the walkaways, the refusals, the solitude, is building something far deeper than temporary peace. It's building an identity lock-in, a state where your sense of self is no longer negotiable, no longer contingent on anyone else's approval, and no longer at the mercy of external chaos. This is where true power lives, not in control over others, but in mastery over yourself. When your identity locks in, you stop chasing what was never meant for you. You stop compromising to fit expectations that never aligned with your values. You stop bending for people who only see your availability as a convenience. And in that space, something extraordinary happens. Your energy stabilizes, your clarity sharpens, and your presence becomes magnetic, not because you're performing, but because you exist fully, authentically, and without apology. This is not a destination. It's a daily practice of self-respect, deliberate choices, and refusal to surrender to chaos disguised as connection. It's remembering every morning that your time, your peace, and your growth are priceless. That saying no without guilt is not selfish, it's survival. That walking away from confusion and disrespect is not weakness, it's proof of strength. The identity lock-in is your personal revolution. It's the moment you finally realize that the only approval you need is your own. That the life you build from here is anchored in clarity, not compromise. That the people who stay, stay because they belong, not because you bend. And the life you've been chasing, the peace, the respect, the alignment, it's been waiting for you all along. You just had to stop giving yourself away to the wrong people, stop negotiating with chaos, and finally, step into the version of yourself that refuses to be anything less than whole.